Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep into sustainable cities today.
That's right.
So buckle up and get ready for a wild ride.
Sounds good.
We've got reports from the UN and the EPA and case studies from all over, Rotterdam, Copenhagen. We're even going to touch on some really cool concepts like regenerative architecture.
It's definitely an exciting time.
It feels like every day there's some new groundbreaking idea or project popping up in a city somewhere.
Yeah, and I think what's really cool is it's not just about, slapping some solar panels on a roof anymore and calling it a day.
Right.
It's about this bigger idea of creating a truly sustainable city.
Yeah.
It's about weaving together the environmental, the social, and the economic to create a resilient habitat for everyone, not just for us now, but for generations to come.
It is a lot more than just green. Our sources keep coming back to this idea of the triple bottom line. But what does that actually mean? I mean, what does that look like in a real city?
Well, you can think of it as a city that's designed to weather any storm that comes its way. Climate change, resource scarcity, social upheaval, you name it. But it's not just about surviving these things, it's about bouncing back even stronger.
Okay.
So yeah, reducing emissions is obviously huge, but it also means making sure everyone has access to resources, including like green spaces. It's about promoting social inclusion and having a thriving economy.
Okay, so it's really about building a system, an ecosystem almost, that's designed to work for everyone. And this EPA report on urban heat islands was really eye-opening. I mean, I knew cities were hotter than surrounding areas, but I had no idea it was that significant.
Oh, yeah. Concrete jungles, they're notorious for absorbing and trapping heat. And that creates this phenomenon we call the urban heat island effect. And it's not just about being uncomfortable. It can be a serious health risk, especially for the more vulnerable folks.
Yeah.
And as global temperatures continue to rise, we're going to see this problem getting worse.
So what can cities do about this? I mean, we've got some pretty awesome examples in our sources. Rotterdam's recycled park. Come on, they're literally building parks that float out of plastic waste.
That's amazing, isn't it? Talk about turning a problem into a solution. I mean, it's not just providing green spaces. They're actually cleaning up the water, tackling plastic pollution head on.
Right.
And they've even got this system, this passive litter trap system, that collects all the floating debris before it can flow out to sea.
That is incredible. And Rotterdam, they're on a roll with this whole floating thing because they also have that floating farm producing food, fresh food, right there on the water.
Absolutely. And it's a trend we're seeing more and more. I mean, as sea levels rise and populations grow, cities are starting to really explore the potential of floating structures. It's a great way to adapt to the changing environment and at the same time, make the most of the space they have.
I love that. It's like they're building a city that's ready for whatever the future throws at it.
Right.
And it doesn't always have to be these huge, grand projects. Yeah. We've also got these tiny forests popping up all over urban landscapes.
Yeah, the tiny forests, sometimes they call them Milwaukee forests, and they're like little pockets of wilderness right in the middle of the city.
Yeah.
Amazing biodiversity, and they grow so much faster than regular forests.
It is amazing.
Right.
And, cleaning the air, providing habitat, a little bit of nature for people to connect with, it's those smaller scale solutions that can really add up.
Oh, yeah.
And speaking of bringing nature into the city, we can't forget about urban farming. I mean, bringing food production right to the heart of it all.
Exactly. It just makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Cutting down on transportation costs and emissions.
Right.
Reconnecting people with their food sources, building community, and the freshness. Can you imagine picking your salad greens right from your rooftop garden?
That would be pretty amazing. Grocery shopping would be a lot more fun, that's for sure. But, okay, we've covered green spaces and food. But what about the buildings themselves? How can architecture contribute to a city's sustainability?
That's where it gets really interesting because we're moving beyond just reducing the negative impact. We're talking about actually creating buildings that regenerate the environment around them.
Really?
Yeah. And one really cool example is the concept of eco-industrial parks.
Eco-industrial parks, what are those?
Imagine a bunch of businesses all operating together like an ecosystem where one company's waste becomes another company's resources.
Oh, wow.
It's called industrial symbiosis.
Okay.
And it's all about minimizing waste, reducing pollution, creating this closed-loop system where resources are constantly being reused.
So it's like this collaborative approach to sustainability where businesses are actually working together to shrink their collective footprint.
Yeah.
Love that. Yeah. And then we've got LE certification, which seems to be like the gold standard for sustainable buildings these days.
Yeah, LED, or Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, provides this framework for creating buildings that are energy efficient, water-wise, and healthy for the people who live and work in them.
Right.
It's become the go-to standard for anyone who wants to build responsibly.
But one of our sources takes it even further.
Yeah.
They talk about this concept called regenerative architecture, which sounds so cool, but I'm not sure I fully understand it. What does that actually mean?
It's like LED on steroids. It goes beyond just minimizing the impact. Regenerative architecture is about buildings that actually give back to the environment. Imagine a building that actually cleans the air and water, provides habitat for wildlife.
Wow.
Yeah. And it even generates more energy than it consumes.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Are there any real-world examples of that yet?
There are some projects emerging that are getting pretty close, like brownfield remediation, where they take these polluted industrial sites and transform them into thriving, productive landscapes.
Oh, wow.
That's a perfect example of regenerative design in action.
So it's not just about coexisting with nature. It's about actually helping it to heal. This is already blowing my mind, and we've only just scratched the surface.
It's pretty amazing. And just wait till we get into sustainable transportation. We're going to talk about electric vehicles, bike lanes, and some seriously innovative public transit systems that are changing how we get around in cities.
I can't wait. I am ready for more. Stay tuned, listeners, because this deep dive is about to get even more exciting.
All right, so let's talk about getting around in these sustainable cities.
Yeah, because a city can't be truly sustainable if everyone's stuck in traffic, right?
Exactly. Our sources are all over this idea that we've got to break free from our dependence on cars.
Especially gas guzzlers.
Oh, yeah. Definitely moving away from those, but it's not just about swapping out gas for electric.
Right, although that's a pretty big part of it. I mean, Tesla and other companies are making some serious waves with electric vehicles.
Absolutely. We're seeing more and more people switching to electric, which is amazing. But it's also about creating this whole system that makes choosing sustainable transportation easy.
So things like having enough charging stations, giving people incentives to ditch their old gas guzzlers.
Exactly.
Make it convenient, make it affordable.
Yeah, and I think we have to give a shout out to the unsung hero of sustainable transport. Public transportation.
Oh, yeah. Good old public transit.
The UN Sustainable Development Goals, particularly Goal 11, they really emphasize how crucial accessible public transit is for social equity in sustainable cities.
It makes sense. If we want cities that work for everyone, everyone needs to be able to get around easily and affordably.
Exactly. That's why we're seeing cities investing in bike lanes, pedestrian-friendly walkways, and making those bus and rail systems super efficient. It's about building a transportation network that's not just good for the planet, but good for people, too.
Okay, so it's about making cities more livable, more accessible for everyone.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really crucial element of sustainable cities, and that's the human element. Designing for people means thinking about the different needs and experiences of all the people who live there.
Yeah, and one of our sources brought up a point that I hadn't really thought about before. They talked about the gendered experience of the built environment.
It's an important point because women often face different challenges getting around a city.
Right.
Think about safety concerns, having access to childcare, even the availability of well-lit and well-maintained public spaces.
Yeah.
Those can have a much bigger impact on women than on men.
It's true. It's a good reminder that sustainable city design needs to be inclusive. We have to consider the needs of everyone.
Absolutely. And inclusivity means thinking about race and income, too.
Yeah.
Our sources use the term environmental injustice to describe how environmental burdens often disproportionately impact minority and low-income communities.
And this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
One source gave the example of unequal heat exposure in historically redlined neighborhoods.
Right. Because they lack green space and tree cover, these neighborhoods tend to be much hotter, which puts residents at a much higher risk during heat waves. It's a stark reminder of how those historical injustices can have lasting environmental consequences.
And it's not just heat. Air pollution tends to be worse in those communities, too.
It's a major issue, and it really raises a critical question. How do we create sustainable cities that are truly just and equitable for everyone?
It's complex, but it's a challenge we have to tackle head on. We need solutions that are sustainable and socially just.
Absolutely.
So, okay, we've talked a lot about theory, about ideas, but what about real-world examples? What about cities that are actually putting these ideas into practice?
That's the exciting part. Our sources are full of inspiring examples from all over the globe. I mean, Adelaide, Australia is making huge strides in solar power.
Yeah,
They've even got solar panels on the roof of their convention center.
that's amazing. And what about Vienna?
Oh, Vienna, Austria. They're aiming for 80% of all trips to be made without cars.
Wow, that's ambitious.
It is. And then you've got Curitiba, Brazil, famous for their super innovative bus rapid transit system.
I've heard about that.
It's a model for sustainable, affordable public transportation.
And of course, we can't forget about Copenhagen, Denmark, the cycling capital of the world.
Absolutely. They have hundreds of kilometers of dedicated bike lanes.
Amazing. These are just a few examples, but they really show that cities are taking action, creating more sustainable and livable spaces.
Definitely. It's encouraging to see this global movement building, cities learning from each other, sharing those best practices, and pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
It's inspiring, for sure, but our sources also point out some of the challenges that cities face when it comes to measuring their progress.
Yeah, it's not always easy to get an accurate picture of a city's emissions, especially in our globalized world where products are made and consumed all over the place. So it raises the question, where does the responsibility lie? How do we account for the environmental impact of our interconnected world?
It's not just about what happens within a city's boundaries, it's about its global footprint. And that brings us to another buzzword we hear a lot: smart cities.
Ah, yes, the intersection of technology and sustainability.
Our sources seem to be pretty excited about how smart city initiatives can help us achieve sustainable development goals.
Yeah, and the key is using technology and data to optimize resource management, reduce energy consumption, and promote eco-friendly practices.
Okay.
Singapore, for instance.
Yeah.
They use sensors to monitor energy use and traffic flow, then make real-time adjustments to improve efficiency.
Wow.
And Amsterdam is using smart grids to integrate renewable energy sources and improve energy distribution.
So cool. It sounds like smart cities have the potential to really shake things up and lead the way towards a more sustainable future. This deep dive has been a whirlwind.
It has been quite a journey. But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listener with something to ponder.
So listener, as we wrap up our deep dive into sustainable cities, I want to take a moment to just reflect on everything we've talked about.
It's been a lot.
It has. What were some of the most surprising or memorable solutions for you?
For me, it's that ingenuity, that creativity behind some of these approaches. It's really remarkable. I mean, who would have thought to transform recycled litter into floating parks or create these thriving miniature forests right in the middle of a city?
It's amazing.
It really shows you what humans can do when we put our minds to it.
I completely agree. That recycled park in Rotterdam was a definite highlight for me, too. But what about the challenges? What are some of the biggest hurdles that cities face on this path towards sustainability?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is finding that balance, that sweet spot between rapid urbanization and sustainable development.
Right, because as cities grow, as more people move in, the demand for resources, for housing, for infrastructure, it just explodes.
Exactly, and that puts a huge strain on the environment. It can lead to overcrowding, pollution, and, even social inequities.
So it's like this constant balancing act.
It is. It's about accommodating growth, but minimizing its impact.
Right. And then there's the issue of funding, which we didn't really touch on too much, but a lot of these solutions, like investing in renewable energy or overhauling public transit systems, that takes money.
Big money.
And a lot of times convincing stakeholders to prioritize those long-term sustainability goals over those short-term gains, that's a tough sell.
It is. And we can't forget about the human element either. We've talked about the importance of social equity, but putting that into practice, that's a whole other challenge.
Because it's one thing to say we want sustainable cities that benefit everyone. But how do you actually do that? How do you make sure everyone has access to those benefits, regardless of income, race, or gender?
It's complex. It's a constant work in progress. It requires a shift in mindset, a real commitment to inclusive design, and policies that address those systemic inequities that we talked about earlier.
Right. It all comes back to that triple bottom line.
It does.
Finding solutions that are good for the environment, good for the economy, and good for people.
Exactly. And when we get it right, sustainable cities, they become these vibrant, thriving places where people want to live, work, and play, not just now, but for generations to come.
And so, listener, as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final thought.
One question to ponder.
If you were designing a sustainable city, what would be your top priority? What's the one thing you'd absolutely want to get right?
It's a good question. What kind of legacy do we want to leave for future generations? What are the values that should guide the design of our cities?
And if you're inspired to learn more about this topic, and we hope you are, we encourage you to check out initiatives in your own city. You might be surprised by the innovative solutions that are already happening right in your backyard.
And remember, sustainability, it's a journey, not a destination. Every step we take, every choice we make, can make a difference in building a better future for our cities and for our planet.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into sustainable cities. We hope you learned something new and maybe even feel inspired to get involved in creating a more sustainable future.